All right. Welcome back to another deep dive. We love to go deep into the source material. And today we have an especially interesting uh, set of documents.
Yeah, these are really quite fascinating.
And what's really cool about these is that these are documents that you, our listener, brought to our attention.
Yeah, these came right from our listener.
And so that, really, I think, speaks to the power of the community
Absolutely, yeah.
that we have built here, that, we're all just sort of, history enthusiasts, and we all help each other out, point each other towards interesting things.
Yeah, we're kind of all in this together, trying to uncover and discover these really cool pieces of history.
Exactly. So, big shout out and thank you to the listener who sent this to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing this with us.
So let's talk about what we've got here. We have two documents. Both of them are classified messages, and both of them are marked as secret.
Yeah, so right away we know that we're dealing with some pretty sensitive information here.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are both, from that Cold War era.
Right, yeah.
So really, kind of a fascinating time in history. So much intrigue and espionage.
Yeah.
And we're going to be focusing on an individual identified as L1.
That's right. And sort of the bigger question too is, are there any connections between L1 and the Soviet bloc?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so that's what we're going to try to figure out today. We're going to use these documents to see what we can piece together.
Yeah, we're like detectives almost, archival detectives trying to put together these clues and see what we can find out.
I like that. I like that. So let's take a look at the first document. This is a cable, and it's coming from the Mexico City station.
Okay.
And it's dated February 22nd, 1966. And the subject line is Assessment of Slarsony 1 by FG4K86.
So this is somebody's assessment of L1.
Right, exactly. And it includes some observations from January 1964.
Oh, okay. So this is interesting. So they're writing this in 1966, but they're including information from a couple years earlier.
Yeah. So we're going to have to keep that in mind as we go through this.
Right.
Okay, so the second document is a secret classified message from December 2nd, 1963.
Okay, so even earlier than the first one.
Even earlier, yep.
Yeah.
And this one was sent from Melbourne to the director, and it's about preliminary checks on recorded conversations.
Okay.
So we've got two different locations. We've got Mexico City and Melbourne.
Right.
So, potentially some interesting connections there. So let's dive into that first document and start learning about L1.
All right, let's do it.
So right away, we see that that there's a request for somebody to call on this person, NOC Sydney B, to facilitate L1's departure to Montevideo.
Interesting. So it seems like they want to get L1 to Montevideo for some reason.
Yeah, and NOC probably means non-official cover, right?
Yeah, that's my guess too. So this Sydney B is probably working in intelligence, but not in an official capacity.
Right. So maybe undercover or something like that.
Exactly.
Okay, so then the assessment moves into some observations about L1's personality and some interesting details about their life.
Okay.
For example, it says that L1 drove from Montevideo to Cho.
Okay.
And that L1 doesn't like driving at night or in the rain.
Well, that's not too unusual. I mean, a lot of people don't like driving at night or in the rain.
Yeah, I mean, I can totally understand that.
Yeah.
But then it also says that L1 can become aggressive and nervous behind the wheel.
Oh, okay. So that's a little bit of a different story there.
Yeah. So it's like, on the one hand, kind of cautious, but then also potentially, a little bit volatile.
Right. Yeah, like a bit of a contradiction there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we get into some details about L1's family life.
Okay.
Apparently, L1 and the wife were living in a small beach house.
Sounds nice.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? But apparently, they were fighting a lot.
Oh.
Yeah, the document says frequent fights.
Yeah, it's so nice then.
Not so much. And it mentions that the wife had a previous relationship with someone they're calling the instigator.
I wonder who that could be.
Yeah, we don't get any more information about that, unfortunately.
Right.
But apparently the wife had said that she wanted to go back to her own apartment once L1 was done with his business trip.
Oh, wow. So it sounds like things were really not good between them.
No, it definitely sounds like there was some serious trouble in paradise.
Yeah.
We also get some background information about the wife. She's described as having both Cuban and Uruguayan heritage.
Okay.
And her parents used to live in Cuba.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, that's just a little detail, but you never know. It could become relevant later on.
Yeah, you never know. It's always good to keep track of those little details.
Exactly. Okay, so then the assessment moves on to L1's financial habits.
Okay.
And says that L1 is muy consumista,
Muy consumista.
Yeah, it's Spanish. And it basically means, a big spender, a shopaholic.
Oh, okay.
And the document suggests that this is because L1 grew up in poverty.
Oh, so maybe they're overcompensating now?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. And it says that F-86 personally observed L1's compulsive shopping.
So this F-86 is probably the agent who's putting together this assessment.
Right. Yeah, it
Yeah.
seems like it. And it says that L1 bought a lot of stuff to send back to family in Cuba.
Interesting.
Yeah, and get this. F-86 actually says that L1 should be the spouse wife.
Spouse swap. What do they mean by that?
I know, right? It's a strange term. I guess they're saying that L1 is the one who's doing all the shopping and spending.
Oh, okay. So like a role reversal kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
And it also mentions that there's suspicion that L1 called the wife a dumb Spaniard.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, not good.
Not good at all.
And it also mentions other problems in the relationship, possibly related to L1 being unfaithful.
Oh, so there's a lot going on there, it sounds like.
Yeah, it does. And during these arguments, the report says that sometimes L1 was the aggressor, but other times L1 would try to keep the peace or just stay quiet.
It's like an unpredictable.
Yeah, it seems
Okay.
like... Oh, and it also mentions that L1 got into arguments with some Palestinian merchants in Chiqui.
Oh, really?
Yeah, just a little detail, but I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, it kind of paints a picture of L1 as maybe having a bit of a temper.
Yeah, maybe having some trouble getting along with people.
Right.
Okay, so then the report talks about another aspect of L1's family life that F-86 found disagreeable.
Okay.
And this was the behavior of L1's older daughter.
Yeah.
Yeah, so apparently the daughter was making frequent sexual references in front of F-86's younger children.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and it says that both F-86 and the wife were offended by this.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And there's this one sentence that's really kind of shocking. F-86 says that L1's daughter acted just like a Cuban hooker.
Wow, that's pretty harsh.
I know, right? It's really judgmental.
Yeah, and keep in mind, this is just F-86's opinion. We don't know what the daughter was actually like.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Okay, so now let's get into the really interesting stuff.
Okay.
The politics.
Yes, this is what I've been waiting for.
So apparently F-86 had some private philosophical and political discussions with L1.
Okay.
And when asked about what writers had influenced L1 the most,
Yeah.
one named Marx, Hegel, and Kant.
Oh, wow. So some pretty heavy hitters there.
Right. Yeah, some real thinkers.
Yeah.
And then L1 said that Lenin's main achievement was recognizing the need for only one party.
Okay, so that's a key principle of Leninist ideology.
Exactly. And then L1 went on to say that Lenin was more of an interpreter of Marx than a great theoretician.
Okay.
But then L1 actually defended Lenin's law of economic prudence as a means of economic planning.
Interesting.
Yeah, and L1 said that Lenin had tried to implement this in the USSR, but it hadn't really worked.
Right.
But that it had been successful in Bulgaria.
So it sounds like L1 has a pretty nuanced understanding of Marxist-Leninist thought.
Yeah, definitely not just blindly following it.
Right.
Okay, and then we get into L1's views on Cuba.
Yeah.
And L1 apparently said that Cuba needed to incorporate something called neoliberal medicine to reform its economy.
Neoliberal medicine. That's an interesting term.
I know, right? It's not what you'd expect to hear from somebody who's talking about Marx and Lenin.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of a mix of ideologies.
Yeah, and L1 also said that other reforms should be made with as little social and political cost as possible.
Okay.
And that the state shouldn't be too interventionist.
So maybe not a full-on socialist then.
Yeah, it's hard to say for sure.
Right.
But L1 did say that the state still has an important role to play in providing social protection because the market economy has its faults.
Okay, so there's a recognition of the limitations of the free market.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Okay, and now this is where things get really crazy.
Okay, lay it on me.
So L1 starts talking about the assassination of President John F. Kennedy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And according to L1 personally saw Fidel Castro give a group of U.S. radicals 4 hours for what seems to be political assassination instructions.
Wow, hold on. So what year is this supposed to have happened?
Well, it doesn't say in this document, but
Yeah.
remember, the cable itself is from 1966.
Right.
And it includes observations from 1964.
Right.
But then later on, it says that this meeting with Castro happened in 1969.
Oh, okay. So something's not adding up here.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mystery.
Yeah.
But anyway, L1 named these U.S. radicals.
Okay. Who are they?
Sanford Traum, William John Sims Beinalong, CCO 122-1960, Holden Beej, Keith Bethke, and an address in Wahroonga.
Wow, that's quite a list. And just so you know, listener, some of those names are going to come up again later.
Yes, they are.
So keep them in mind.
Okay, so these instructions were supposedly directed against two individuals. Kennedy and possibly Castro ordered a replacement for Kennedy using the name Waller Harvey Oswald Puppetold.
Waller Harvey Oswald Puppetold.
Yeah, it's a weird one.
Yeah, that's very strange.
And then L1 said that 3 different groups were involved in killing the president.
Okay.
A group of Cubans, a group of mafiosos, and a group of mercenaries.
Wow, so like a real conspiracy theory.
Yeah, and L1 told F-86 that it's not known if any of these groups had any connection with Infinite. Yeah, I guess that must be some kind of intelligence operation or something.
Yeah, probably a code name for something.
Right, and then F-86 noted that L1 is always careful not to attack Peen Infinite when F-86 is present.
Interesting. So it's like L1 knows that F-86 is interested in Infinite and is being cautious.
Yeah, exactly. Like they're trying not to say anything that could get them in trouble.
Right.
Okay, so that's the first document.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack.
I know, right? It's really quite something.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the second document.
Okay.
The secret classified message from Melbourne.
You're right.
And this one is all about a Polish driver who's connected to the Russian diplomatic establishment in Australia.
Okay, so now we're shifting gears a bit.
Yeah, we're
Okay.
going from Mexico City to Melbourne.
Right.
And from
Yeah.
personal assessments to,
Yeah.
potential Soviet bloc activity.
Exactly.
So it says that headquarters had requested information about this driver
Okay.
and that they did some preliminary checks on recorded conversations.
Okay. What did they
Well, they break it down into 5 points.
Okay.
Point A is that they couldn't find any record of a 1952 dark blue Buick belonging to any Soviet or bloc installation in Canberra or Sydney.
Okay, so that's a dead end.
Yeah, it's
It seems like it.
All right, what about point B?
Okay, so point B is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
They were looking for a specific license plate, but they couldn't find an exact match.
Okay.
But they did find a foil, which I guess means, a similar plate.
Yeah, like maybe a variation on the number or something.
Right, and they found 3 variations.
Okay.
CCC012, which was registered to a 1960 Vauxhall two-toned blue owned by Herman Satrapinski in Wentworthville.
Okay.
CCC122, registered to a 1948 Standard Fawn owned by William John Sims in Bynalong.
Hold on. William John Sims.
Yeah, remember that name from the first document?
Yeah, he was one of the U.S. radicals who L1 said met with Castro.
Exactly.
Wow, that's a pretty big coincidence.
Yeah, I know, right?
Okay, what's the third variation? CCO122, registered to a 1960 Holden Beach, owned by Keith Besky at an address in Wahroonga.
Keith Bethke, another one of the names from the first document.
I know, it's crazy, right?
Yeah, so now we have 2 names that appear in both of these documents, one related to L1 and Castro, and the other related to this Polish driver and the Soviet bloc.
Right. It's definitely something to think about.
Yeah, this is getting very interesting.
Okay, so point C is that they couldn't find any information about an Aussie mentioned with the code CNBR0591.
Okay, another dead end?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
Point D says that the Frasers mentioned with the same reference are ALP MPs?
ALP, so Australian Labor Party.
Right, so I guess these are just some politicians.
Oh, okay, makes sense.
And then point E is about the Indonesian First Secretary,
Okay.
possibly identified as R. Willie Sastronegro.
There?
And he apparently has a mustache.
Okay, well, that's good to know.
Yeah, you never know. It could be important.
You never know.
But the message says that they don't know his Russian capability and that he wasn't noticeably close to the SOVS CNBR.
SOVS CNBR.
Yeah, I'm guessing that means the Soviets in Canberra.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay, so then the message says that they've arranged with a PMG liaison officer named Ted Young to trace any further calls that are made.
Okay, so they're still investigating.
Yeah, they're not giving up.
Good.
And it says that the embassy is in close contact with Square.
Square.
Yeah, I guess that's the code name for the intelligence unit that's working on this.
Yeah, probably.
And then the message just says that they'll advise on any further developments.
Okay, so that's where we leave it.
Yeah, that's all we get for now.
All right, so let's take a step back and try to put all of this together.
Yes, let's do that.
Okay, so we have L1, this complex individual with some pretty radical political views and this wild story about Castro and the Kennedy assassination.
Right.
And then we have this separate investigation into potential Soviet bloc activity in Australia.
Right.
And the thing that ties it all together is those 2 names, William John Sims and Keith Bethke.
Exactly. They appear in both documents.
Yeah, and it's just too much of a coincidence to ignore.
Right, like what are the chances?
Exactly. And think about the timeline, too.
Yeah.
The Melbourne message is from December 1963, just a few weeks after the Kennedy assassination.
Right.
And the Mexico City cable is from February 1966, but it includes observations from January 1964.
Right.
So these investigations were happening around the same time.
Yeah, and maybe they were even connected somehow.
It's possible.
Like maybe L1's claims about Castro and these U.S. radicals led to the investigation in Australia.
Yeah, or maybe the intelligence agencies were already looking into these people and L1 just happened to know something about them.
Right. It's hard to say for sure.
Yeah, but it's definitely something to think about.
Okay, so to sum up for our listener,
Yes.
we have L1, who's this, kind of mysterious figure with a lot going on in their personal life.
Right.
And they've got these interesting political beliefs.
Yeah.
And they're claiming to have knowledge about the Kennedy assassination.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have this whole other investigation in Australia that might be related.
Exactly.
And it all comes down to those two names.
William John Sims and Keith Bethke.
Yeah. Two guys who just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Or maybe the right place at the right time, depending on how you look at it.
Right? It all depends on your perspective.
Exactly.
And you know what I think is so cool about these documents is that they give us this really raw, unfiltered look into the intelligence world.
Yeah, I agree.
Like we see the personal assessments, the code names, the
Yeah,
suspicion.
that's all right there in black and white.
Yeah, and it's just fascinating.
It really is.
So for our listener who's been following along with us,
Yeah.
here's a final thought for you to ponder.
Okay.
What does it tell us about the nature of intelligence work that we see these two seemingly separate things?
Yeah.
This personal assessment from Mexico City and this investigation into Soviet links in Australia,
Right.
both existing in the historical record.
Yeah.
How do these little glimpses into the past help us to understand huge events like the Kennedy assassination?
Yeah, that's a great question.
And how do they shape our view of the people who were involved?
Yeah, it really makes you think.
So we encourage you to keep digging, keep researching, keep exploring the history of the Cold War and the Kennedy assassination.
Yeah, there's so much more to learn.
Exactly. And who knows what other secrets are still out there waiting to be discovered.
Yeah, that's the exciting part.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
With pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
See you later.